Her world shattered in a place of supposed justice. Pregnant and fighting for her future, Isabella faced her husband's betrayal, the courtroom air thick with his lies. But the cruelest blow came from his mistress, Victoria, whose mocking laughter echoed as Isabella's strength gave out, and she collapsed. It seemed like the end. But in the hushed chaos that followed, the judge held a secret that would change everything. An envelope containing a truth so powerful it would wipe the smirk off the mistress's face forever and expose a lie bigger than anyone could have imagined. Isabella Hayes believed she had it all. From the outside, her life was a carefully curated masterpiece. She was married to Richard Hayes, a man whose ambition was as sharp as his tailored suits. His company, Hayes Development, was reshaping the city's skyline, one gleaming tower at a time. Their penthouse apartment, a glass box perched atop one of Richard's signature buildings, offered panoramic views of a world that seemed to lay at their feet. They were the golden couple, their photos gracing the society pages, their life a testament to modern success. This morning, like most mornings, began with the soft hum of the city waking below. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the minimalist living room. The scent of freshly brewed espresso filled the air, a ritual Isabella performed with meticulous care. She placed a steaming mug on the marble island next to Richard's plate of untouched toast. He was already on his phone, his brow furrowed in concentration, his thumb scrolling relentlessly. "Big day today?" she asked, her voice a gentle melody in the quiet space. She ran a hand over her burgeoning belly, a soft, protective gesture that had become second nature. At 7 months pregnant, she was a vessel of life, carrying their future, their son. Richard grunted in response, his eyes still glued to the screen. "Potentially. The Harrison deal is on a knife's edge. If we land it, we'll secure the waterfront project." "That's wonderful, darling," she said, though a familiar pang of disappointment pricked at her. She had hoped for a shared smile, a moment of connection before he was swallowed by his corporate world. She moved behind him, wrapping her arms around his shoulders and resting her cheek against his. "He's kicking," she whispered, trying to guide his hand to the spot. "He always gets excited when he hears your voice." Richard's hand remained firmly on his phone. "That's nice, Izzy," he said, his tone distracted. He finally looked up, his gaze distant. "I need to go. I have an early meeting with the architects." He drained his espresso in one gulp, pecked her on the cheek, and was gone. The scent of his expensive cologne lingered in the air, a ghost of his presence. Isabella sighed, a slow release of a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. This was their new normal. Richard, once so attentive and present, had become a man perpetually in motion, always chasing the next deal, the next victory. She told herself it was for them, for their growing family. His ambition was what had drawn her to him in the first place. He was a force of nature, and she had been happy to be swept up in his storm. She had met Richard at a charity gala 5 years ago. She was a budding art curator, passionate and full of dreams. He was the charismatic entrepreneur who had charmed her with his grand visions and unwavering confidence. He had pursued her with a single-minded determination that had been both flattering and overwhelming. He had promised her the world, and in many ways he had delivered. He had funded her own art gallery, Gallery Isabella, a chic space in the heart of the arts district. He had given her a life of luxury she could only have dreamed of. But lately, the gold of her gilded cage had started to feel cold and heavy. Her days were a blur of prenatal yoga classes, meetings with gallery staff, and lunches with friends who envied her life. They saw the designer clothes, the lavish vacations, the perfect husband. They didn't see the long, lonely evenings when Richard worked late, or the way his phone seemed permanently attached to his hand, a barrier between them. They didn't hear the silence that stretched between them in the vast, empty spaces of their home. Later that day, Isabella was at her gallery, overseeing the installation of a new exhibition. She loved this space. It was the one part of her life that felt entirely her own. Here, she wasn't just Richard Hayes's wife. She was Isabella, a woman with a keen eye for talent and a passion for art. Her assistant, a young, eager woman named Chloe, approached her with a tablet. "The final proofs for the catalog are ready for your approval, Isabella." Isabella smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached her eyes. "Thank you, Chloe. You've done a wonderful job." As she reviewed the proofs, her phone buzzed. It was a text from Richard. "Meeting ran late. Don't wait up for me, R." The familiar pang of disappointment returned, sharper this time. He had promised to take her to dinner tonight, to celebrate the gallery's anniversary. She typed back, "Everything okay? Don't forget our dinner plans." Minutes turned into an hour, and there was no reply. She called his phone, but it went straight to voicemail. She tried to dismiss the unease coiling in her gut. He was busy. The Harrison deal was important. She was being needy, emotional. It was the pregnancy hormones, she told herself. But as she drove home through the glittering city, a sense of foreboding settled over her. The city lights, usually a source of comfort and wonder, seemed to mock her, reflecting the emptiness of her own life. Back in the penthouse, the silence was deafening. She ate a solitary dinner at the Marble Island, the city lights her only companion. Later, as she prepared for bed, she noticed Richard's gym bag lying by the closet. He had said he was going straight to the office from an early morning workout. She unzipped it, intending to put his things in the laundry. Inside, nestled amongst his workout clothes, was a small velvet box. Her heart skipped a beat. Was it a gift? An anniversary surprise? Her fingers trembled as she opened it. Inside lay a delicate diamond necklace, exquisitely crafted and undeniably expensive. It was beautiful, but it wasn't her style. It was too flashy, too ostentatious. It was the kind of jewelry she'd seen on the wives of Richard's business associates, women who dripped with diamonds and desperation. Then she saw the inscription on the back of the pendant. A single initial. V. Isabella's blood ran cold. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of it. V for victory? For the waterfront project? It was a stretch. A desperate attempt to rationalize what her gut was screaming at her. This wasn't for her. This was for someone else. The gilded cage she had so carefully constructed around herself suddenly felt like a prison. The panoramic views from her penthouse window no longer looked like a world at her feet, but a world from which she was completely detached. And for the first time in a long time, Isabella Hayes felt a terrifying, gut-wrenching fear. Her perfect life, she realized, was a perfect lie. And she was standing right in the middle of it. The discovery of the necklace marked a shift in Isabella's world. The subtle cracks she had been papering over in her marriage now gaped open, revealing a chasm of doubt and suspicion. The initial shock gave way to a cold, methodical resolve. She placed the velvet box back in the gym bag, her movements precise and deliberate, a stark contrast to the turmoil raging within her. She would not confront Richard. Not yet. An accusation without proof was just hysteria, and she knew he would twist her words, use her pregnancy-induced emotions against her. She needed more than a single, damning initial. The following days were a masterclass in deception. Isabella played the part of the devoted, doting wife, a role she had unknowingly been rehearsing for years. She greeted Richard with a smile, asked about his day, and feigned interest in his business dealings. But behind the placid facade, her mind was whirring, every sense on high alert. She became a detective in her own home, searching for clues in the mundane details of their shared life. The whispers started with his phone. Once casually left on the kitchen counter, it was now his constant companion, always in his pocket or placed face down on his desk. When it buzzed, he would glance at it quickly, his expression unreadable, before silencing it. The password, once their anniversary, had been changed. When she casually asked him for it, feigning a need to look up a recipe, he had hesitated for a fraction of a second too long. "It's the new security protocol from the office, Izzy. Too complex to remember. Just use your own phone." The excuse was plausible, yet it felt like a door slamming shut in her face. Then came the receipts. Richard had always been meticulous with his finances, a trait that had once reassured her. Now his precision seemed suspicious. She started going through his credit card statements online, a violation of privacy she never thought she'd be capable of. She found a series of charges that didn't add up. A dinner for two at Le Ciel, one of the city's most romantic restaurants, on a night he claimed to be working late with his team. A charge from a high-end lingerie boutique, Fleur du Mal, a place she had never shopped at. And then, the most jarring discovery, a recurring monthly payment to a luxury apartment complex in a trendy, upscale neighborhood she rarely visited. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she stared at the screen. The amount was substantial, enough to rent a very comfortable apartment. Was this where he went on those late nights? Was this V's home? The thought was a physical blow, winding her, leaving her breathless. Isabella knew she had to see it for herself. One afternoon, under the pretext of visiting a new artist's studio, she drove to the address on the statement. The building was sleek and modern, its glass facade reflecting the clear blue sky. It was the kind of place for the young, successful, and unattached. Her hands trembled on the steering wheel as she parked across the street, her car a pathetic hiding place. She sat there for hours, a silent sentinel, watching the anonymous faces of residents come and go. Just as she was about to give up, her hope and dread warring within her, she saw him. Richard's gleaming black car pulled into the underground garage. He emerged a few minutes later, not in his usual sharp suit, but in casual, relaxed clothing. He looked younger, freer, a version of himself she hadn't seen in years. And he wasn't alone. A woman walked beside him, her hand tucked possessively in the crook of his arm. She was tall and stunningly beautiful, with long, dark hair that cascaded down her back. She was laughing, her head thrown back in a gesture of pure, unadulterated joy. And as they drew closer to the building's entrance, Isabella saw it. Glistening against the woman's collarbone was the diamond necklace. The necklace with the V pendant. Isabella felt the air leave her lungs. The world tilted on its axis, the scene before her blurring at the edges. So this was V, Victoria. The name came to her in a flash of intuition, a gut feeling so strong it was almost a certainty. The woman was the embodiment of everything Isabella was not. She was carefree, confident, and utterly captivating. Isabella shrank down in her seat, a wave of nausea washing over her. She watched as Richard leaned in and kissed Victoria, a passionate, lingering kiss that spoke of intimacy and familiarity. It was a kiss he hadn't given Isabella in months, maybe years. They disappeared into the building, leaving Isabella alone in her car, the silence a deafening roar in her ears. The drive home was a blur of tears and numb disbelief. The gilded cage had shattered, its golden bars now sharp, cruel shards. The life she had believed in, the man she had loved, the future she had been carrying. It was all a lie. a meticulously crafted, beautifully decorated lie. That evening, Richard came home late, as usual. He found her in the nursery, sitting in the rocking chair, her hands wrapped around her belly. The room was filled with soft toys, tiny clothes, and the scent of baby powder. It was a room filled with promises that now felt hollow. "Izzy, what are you doing in the dark?" he asked, his voice laced with a weary sort of affection. She didn't turn to look at him. She couldn't. "Just thinking," she said, her voice a ghost of its usual self. He came to her, kneeling before her, and placed a hand on her belly. "He's going to have your eyes," he said softly. The hypocrisy of his words, of this tender gesture, was a fresh wave of pain. She looked at him then, her eyes searching his for a flicker of remorse, a hint of the truth. But all she saw was the same handsome, confident man she had married. The man who could build empires and break hearts with the same effortless charm. "I saw you today, Richard," she said, her voice trembling but steady. With her, the change in him was instantaneous. The tenderness vanished, replaced by a cold, hard mask. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't lie to me," she whispered, the words tearing at her throat. "I saw the necklace, I saw the apartment, I saw everything." He stood up, towering over her, his shadow swallowing her in the dim light. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken truths and years of deception. The whispers had become a roar, and the shadows had finally taken form. The battle for her future, for her child's future, had just begun. The air in the nursery, once a sanctuary of hopeful dreams, was now thick with the poison of betrayal. Isabella remained in the rocking chair, her hands protectively cradling her belly, a silent anchor in the storm that was about to break. Richard stood before her, his posture rigid, his face a carefully constructed mask of innocence. But his eyes, those windows to the soul she once thought she knew so well, betrayed a flicker of panic. "You're being ridiculous, Isabella," he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "You're pregnant, emotional. You're not thinking clearly." It was his classic defense, the one he used whenever she dared to question him, to challenge his authority. He was painting her as the hysterical wife, a narrative he had been subtly crafting for years, but this time, Isabella would not be silenced. The sight of him with Victoria, the casual intimacy of their kiss, had burned away the last vestiges of her self-doubt. She rose from the chair, her movements slow and deliberate, and faced him, her eyes blazing with a newfound fire. "Don't you dare use our child as an excuse for your lies," she said, her voice shaking with a potent mix of anger and grief. "I saw you, Richard. I saw you kiss her. I saw the necklace you bought her, the one you hid in your gym bag, the one with the initial V on it. Is her name Victoria?" The mention of the name, the specificity of her knowledge, seemed to land a physical blow. Richard flinched, a barely perceptible movement, but Isabella saw it. It was the first crack in his armor. "You've been following me?" he demanded, shifting his strategy from dismissal to outrage. "You've been spying on me, after everything I've given you? This gallery, this apartment, this life. You have no right to question me." "I have every right," she countered, her voice rising. "I am your wife, the mother of your child. I have the right to know who you are sharing our life with, our money with, our future with." "She's nobody," he spat, the words laced with contempt. "She's a distraction, a bit of fun. It means nothing." "Nothing?" Isabella's laugh was a bitter, broken sound. "You pay for her apartment, you buy her diamond necklaces, you spend the nights you're supposed to be with your family, with her. That doesn't sound like nothing to me, Richard. That sounds like a second life." He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, a gesture of frustration and impatience. "You wouldn't understand. The pressure I'm under, the stress of the business. Sometimes a man needs An escape. An escape? She repeated, the word tasting like ash in her mouth. And what about me? What's my escape, Richard? When I'm up all night, worried about you, about the baby, where do I get to go? Who do I get to turn to? The raw vulnerability in her voice seemed to momentarily break through his defenses. He took a step towards her, his expression softening. Izzy, come on. It's not like that. I love you. You and the baby. You're my world. His words, once a source of comfort and security, now felt like a manipulative ploy. She backed away from him, her hand held up as if to ward off his lies. No, don't touch me. Don't you dare say you love me. Not after this. His face hardened again, his brief moment of contrition evaporating. Fine. You want to be this way? You want to throw away everything we have because of a stupid, meaningless fling? Then so be it. He turned to leave, dismissing her, dismissing their entire life together with a casual shrug. It's not meaningless to me, she cried, her voice cracking. And it's not meaningless to our son. What am I supposed to tell him? That his father was too busy building his empire and sleeping with other women to be there for him? He whirled around, his eyes blazing with a cold fury she had never seen before. You will not use my son against me. He's my son too, she shot back, her maternal instincts kicking in, a fierce, protective wave. And I will not have him raised in a house built on lies and deceit. I want you to leave, Richard. I want you out of this house. Tonight. A humorless, mocking smile twisted his lips. You want me to leave? My house? The one I paid for? The one you so happily decorated with my money? You're delusional, Isabella. I don't care about the money, she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. I care about honesty. I care about respect. And you have shown me none. You're making a huge mistake, he said, his voice low and threatening. You have no idea who you're dealing with. You think you can fight me? I will ruin you. I will take everything from you. You'll be left with nothing. I already have nothing, she replied, her gaze unwavering. Because I have nothing real. This life, this marriage, it's all a sham, and I'm done playing my part. He stared at her for a long moment, his expression a mixture of disbelief and fury. He saw a woman he no longer recognized. The timid, accommodating wife had been replaced by a woman of steel, a woman who had found her strength in the ashes of her broken heart. Without another word, he turned and stormed out of the nursery, the slam of the front door echoing through the vast, empty penthouse. The sound was final, a punctuation mark at the end of a chapter of her life. Isabella sank back into the rocking chair, the adrenaline that had fueled her confrontation draining away, leaving her weak and trembling. She wrapped her arms around her belly, tears streaming down her face. She had done it. She had stood up to him. She had chosen herself, her son, over the gilded cage. The path ahead was terrifying and uncertain. She knew Richard's threat was not an idle one. He would come after her with everything he had. But as she sat there in the quiet darkness of the nursery, a strange sense of peace settled over her. For the first time in a long time, she was free. The confrontation was over, but the war had just begun. The transition from the sterile silence of her penthouse to the charged atmosphere of the courtroom was a jarring one. The family court building was a stoic, imposing structure of granite and glass, a place where lives were dissected and futures decided under the cold, impartial gaze of the law. For Isabella, it felt less like a hall of justice and more like a modern-day coliseum, and she was the gladiator being led into the arena. Her lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Sarah Jenkins, had warned her it would be difficult. Richard has hired the best, she had said, her tone grim. Landon Michaels is known for his scorched earth tactics. He will try to paint you as an unstable gold-digging opportunist. You need to be prepared for that. Isabella had steeled herself for the fight, but the reality of it was more brutal than she could have imagined. The preliminary hearings had been a relentless assault on her character. Richard's legal team had twisted her every action, her every word, into something sinister. Her passion for her art gallery was portrayed as frivolous spending. Her prenatal anxiety was presented as evidence of emotional instability. They were trying to build a case that she was an unfit mother, a desperate attempt to gain leverage in the divorce settlement. Today was the first day of the official proceedings, the day they would discuss the division of assets and, most importantly, the terms of custody for their unborn child. The courtroom was a grand, wood-paneled room, the air thick with the scent of old paper and quiet desperation. Isabella sat at the plaintiff's table, her back ramrod straight, her hands resting on her swollen belly as if to shield her son from the toxicity of the room. Sarah sat beside her, a reassuringly solid presence. Richard was already at the defendant's table, looking every bit the powerful, wronged husband. He was impeccably dressed in a dark, custom-tailored suit, his expression a carefully calibrated mix of sorrow and resolve. His lawyer, Landon Michaels, was a slick, silver-haired man with a shark-like smile, but it wasn't Richard or his lawyer that made Isabella's breath catch in her throat. It was the woman sitting in the front row of the gallery, directly behind Richard. Victoria. She was even more beautiful up close. Dressed in a form-fitting crimson dress that screamed confidence and defiance, she looked as if she had just stepped off a fashion runway. Her dark hair was styled in perfect waves, her makeup flawless. She met Isabella's gaze across the room, and a slow, triumphant smirk spread across her face. It was a look of pure, unadulterated victory, a silent declaration that she had won. Isabella's heart pounded in her chest. The audacity of the woman to show up here, to flaunt her victory in Isabella's face, was staggering. She was a living, breathing testament to Richard's betrayal, and her presence in this courtroom was a calculated act of cruelty. The proceedings began, and the room was filled with the monotonous drone of legal jargon. Landon Michaels was the first to speak, his voice smooth and persuasive, as he painted a picture of Richard as a hard-working, generous man who had been blindsided by his wife's sudden and irrational behavior. "Mr. Hayes has provided his wife with a life of unparalleled luxury," he said, his voice resonating through the courtroom. "He has supported her hobbies, funded her business ventures, and given her everything a woman could possibly want. And how does she repay him? With unfounded accusations, emotional outbursts, and a desperate attempt to seize the assets he has worked his entire life to build." Sarah countered with a calm, measured defense, presenting evidence of Richard's infidelity, including the apartment lease and credit card statements. But Michaels was a master of deflection, twisting each piece of evidence, framing it as a misunderstanding, a business expense, a gesture of friendship. "My client is a generous man," he said with a dismissive wave of his hand. "He helps many people. Is it now a crime to be kind?" Isabella felt a rising tide of frustration and helplessness. They were making her feel like the villain in her own story. She watched as Richard sat there, nodding in agreement with his lawyer's outrageous claims, his face a mask of solemn sincerity. He wouldn't even look at her. The judge, a stern, gray-haired woman named Judge Eleanor Vance, listened patiently, her expression unreadable. She had a reputation for being tough but fair, a woman who could see through the theatrics and get to the heart of the matter. Isabella clung to that reputation like a lifeline. As the morning wore on, the focus shifted to the baby. Michaels argued that given Isabella's fragile emotional state, it was in the child's best interest for Richard to have primary custody. "Mr. Hayes can provide the child with a stable, secure home, with the financial resources to ensure his every need is met," Michaels argued. "Ms. Hayes, on the other hand, is unpredictable." The word hung in the air, a deliberate, poisoned dart. Isabella felt a surge of rage so intense it made her dizzy. Unpredictable? Unstable? She had been a rock, a constant in Richard's whirlwind life. She had built a home, a life, a future for them. And now they were trying to take her son away from her. She looked over at Victoria again. The smirk was still there, wider this time, more confident. She caught Richard's eye and gave him a subtle, encouraging nod. They were a team, a united front against her. The mistress and the husband, sitting in a court of law, trying to strip the wife and mother of everything she held dear. The courtroom felt like it was closing in on her, the walls seeming to shrink, the air growing thin. The weight of the betrayal, the stress of the legal battle, the fierce, protective love for her unborn child. It was all becoming too much to bear. A wave of dizziness washed over her, and the edges of her vision began to blur. The judge's voice, the lawyer's arguments, the smug look on Victoria's face, it all started to fade into a muffled, distant hum. The gilded cage had been replaced by a courtroom, but the feeling of being trapped, of being suffocated, was the same. The pressure in the courtroom was suffocating, a physical weight pressing down on Isabella's chest. Landon Michael's words echoed in her ears, each one a carefully aimed blow designed to dismantle her credibility, her character, her very identity as a mother. Fragile emotional state, unpredictable. The clinical dismissive terms were a cruel distortion of the pain and betrayal she had endured. She gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white, trying to anchor herself in the swirling chaos of her thoughts. She had to be strong. For her son. She focused on the steady, rhythmic beat of her own heart, a counterpoint to the frantic pounding in her head. Furthermore, Michaels continued, his voice dripping with false concern, we believe that Ms. Hayes's erratic behavior poses a potential risk to the child. A newborn requires a calm, stable environment, something we fear Ms. Hayes is currently incapable of providing. A collective gasp rippled through the gallery. It was a low blow, a vicious, calculated strike at her deepest vulnerability. To suggest she could be a danger to her own child was a cruelty beyond measure. Isabella's eyes flew to Richard's. She searched his face for a flicker of protest, a sign that this had gone too far, that even he had a line that wouldn't be crossed. But his expression was unyielding, his gaze fixed on his lawyer, his jaw set in a hard, determined line. He was complicit in this. He was allowing this to happen. Her gaze then shifted to the source of so much of her pain, to Victoria. The woman was not even trying to hide her glee. Her lips were curled into a triumphant, mocking smile, her eyes sparkling with malicious delight. As Isabella watched, Victoria leaned over and whispered something in the ear of the woman sitting next to her. They both looked at Isabella, and then erupted in a soft but distinctly audible laugh. It was a sound of pure contempt, a sound that cut through the legal jargon and the courtroom decorum, a sound that sliced through Isabella's carefully constructed composure. It was the sound of a woman who had taken everything from her, her husband, her home, her sense of security, and was now reveling in her destruction. That laugh was the final straw. The room began to spin, the faces of the judge, the lawyers, the spectators, blurring into a grotesque, distorted mural. A cold sweat broke out on her forehead, and her breath came in ragged, shallow gasps. The baby, as if sensing her distress, gave a sudden, sharp kick, a jolt of life in the midst of her spiraling despair. She tried to speak, to tell Sarah that she wasn't feeling well, that she needed a moment. But the words wouldn't come. A black, shadowy veil descended over her vision, and the muffled sounds of the courtroom faded into an echoing silence. Her hand, which had been clutching her belly, slipped away. She slumped forward, her body suddenly weightless, her consciousness receding like a tide going out to sea. The last thing she heard was Sarah's cry of alarm, a sharp, panicked, "Isabella!" And then nothing. The courtroom erupted into chaos. Sarah leaped to her feet, shouting for a medic. The bailiffs rushed forward, Even Judge Vance, for a moment, lost her judicial composure, her eyes wide with shock and concern. Richard, for his part, seemed frozen in his chair, his face a mask of stunned disbelief. The carefully orchestrated legal drama had suddenly become terrifyingly real. But Victoria's reaction was the most telling. As the room buzzed with frantic energy, as Isabella lay unconscious on the floor, Victoria's mocking smile faltered for only a second, replaced by a flicker of annoyance, as if this was an inconvenient interruption to her entertainment. The laughter had stopped, but the cold, callous amusement in her eyes remained. Paramedics arrived, their movements swift and professional. They surrounded Isabella, checking her vitals, speaking in low, urgent tones. Sarah hovered over them, her face pale with worry. "It's the stress," she murmured to one of the paramedics. "She's 7 months pregnant. This whole ordeal—" The lead paramedic nodded grimly. "Her blood pressure is dangerously low. We need to get her to the hospital, now." As they carefully lifted Isabella onto a stretcher, a tense, unnatural silence fell over the courtroom. All eyes were on the dramatic, unexpected turn of events. All eyes, that is, except for Judge Vance's. Her gaze was fixed on Richard, and then on Victoria. She had seen the smirk. She had heard the whispered laugh. She had watched the entire cruel performance play out. And her expression, once unreadable, was now one of cold, undisguised fury. "This hearing is adjourned," she announced, her voice ringing with an authority that cut through the lingering chaos. "We will reconvene tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. She paused, her eyes narrowing as she looked directly at Landon Michaels. "And Mr. Michaels," she said, her tone icy, "I suggest you and your client have a serious discussion about courtroom decorum. This is a court of law, not a theater for personal vendettas. Any further displays of disrespect will be met with the harshest possible sanctions." Her words were a clear, unequivocal warning. The game had changed. The collapse had been a moment of weakness for Isabella, but it had also been a moment of revelation for the judge. The mask of the wronged husband and the supportive friend had slipped, revealing the ugly, cruel faces beneath. And Judge Vance was not a woman who suffered fools or bullies gladly. Isabella awoke to the steady, rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor and the sterile, antiseptic smell of a hospital room. For a moment, she was disoriented, the stark white walls a jarring contrast to the dark wood of the courtroom she last remembered. Then, the events of the previous day came rushing back in a tidal wave of anxiety and fear. The collapse, the mocking laughter, the threat of losing her son. Sarah was sitting in a chair by her bedside, her face etched with concern. "Hey," she said softly, her voice a comforting balm. "Welcome back. You gave us all quite a scare." "The baby?" Isabella whispered, her hand instinctively flying to her belly. "The baby is fine," Sarah reassured her. "Strong heartbeat. The doctor said you collapsed from stress-induced hypotension. You just need to rest." Rest. The concept seemed like a foreign luxury. How could she rest when her entire future was hanging in the balance? "The hearing," she began. "It's been reconvened for this morning," Sarah said, her expression hardening. "But don't worry. I've already filed a motion for a continuance. You're in no condition to—" "No," Isabella interrupted, her voice surprisingly firm. She pushed herself up, wincing at the pull of the IV in her arm. "I have to be there." "Isabella, that's not a good idea," Sarah protested. "They think I'm weak, Sarah," she said, her eyes flashing with a renewed determination. "They think I'm unstable. If I don't show up today, it will just prove their point. I'm not going to let them win. Not like this." And so, against her lawyer's and her doctor's advice, Isabella returned to the courtroom. She was paler, more fragile-looking than the day before, but there was a new steel in her spine. The events of the previous day had not broken her. They had forged her. The atmosphere in the courtroom was palpably different. The air was thick with a tense, expectant silence. Richard and his legal team looked subdued, chastened by the judge's warning. Even Victoria, seated once again in the gallery, had replaced her smirk with a more demure, contemplative expression, though her eyes still held a glint of defiance. Judge Vance entered, her face as stern and unreadable as ever. "Before we proceed," she began, her voice cutting through the silence, "I want to address the events of yesterday. This court is deeply concerned by the tactics being employed in this case, and the undue emotional distress being placed upon a pregnant woman. Let me be clear, this will not be tolerated." She then turned her attention to a file on her desk, a file that hadn't been there the day before. In light of the intensity of these proceedings and the serious nature of the custody dispute, I took the liberty of expediting a certain piece of evidence that was submitted by the plaintiff's counsel last week. She picked up a sealed manila envelope. The room held its collective breath. "Mr. Hayes," Judge Vance said, her eyes locking onto Richard's, "you have repeatedly stated that your primary concern is the welfare of your unborn child, a child you claim to be yours." "Of course, Your Honor," Richard said, his voice smooth and confident. "He is my son, my heir." "And you, Mr. Michaels, have built your entire case for custody around this paternal claim and the supposed instability of the mother," the judge continued, her gaze shifting to the lawyer. "That is correct, Your Honor," Michaels affirmed, though a flicker of unease was now visible in his eyes. "I see," the judge said, her voice dangerously quiet. She ripped open the envelope with a sharp, decisive tear that echoed through the silent courtroom. She pulled out a single sheet of paper and studied it for a long, dramatic moment. Then she looked up, her gaze sweeping over Richard, then Victoria, before finally settling on Isabella, a flicker of something that looked almost like compassion in her eyes. "Well, this certainly clarifies things," she said. She leaned forward, placing the paper flat on her desk and turning it to face the courtroom. With a resounding thud that made everyone jump, she slammed her hand down on the table next to it. "The results of the prenatal paternity test," she announced, her voice ringing with authority. "According to this legally binding document, the probability of Richard Hayes being the biological father of Isabella Hayes' child is 0%. The silence in the courtroom was absolute, a perfect, stunned vacuum. Then, a collective, audible gasp. Isabella stared, her mind struggling to process the words. 0%. It was impossible. She had never been with anyone else. Richard was the only man she had ever loved, the only man she had ever been with. This had to be a mistake. Richard's face had gone completely white, the color draining from it, as if he had seen a ghost. He stared at the paper, then at Isabella, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, no sound coming out. Landon Michaels looked as if he had been poleaxed, his slick, confident demeanor shattering into a million pieces. His entire case, his entire strategy, had been obliterated in a single, devastating moment. But the most dramatic reaction came from Victoria. Her carefully constructed mask of demure innocence crumbled, revealing the raw, ugly shock beneath. She shot to her feet, her eyes wide with disbelief, her finger pointing accusingly at Isabella. "She's lying. She cheated. That baby isn't his." "Sit down, madam," Judge Vance thundered, her voice a whip crack that silenced Victoria instantly. "There will be order in this court." The judge's gaze returned to Richard, her eyes filled with a cold, righteous fury. "Mr. Hayes," she said, her voice dripping with contempt, "it seems you have been lying to this court, lying to your wife, lying to everyone. The question is, why?" The verdict was in. But it wasn't the verdict anyone had been expecting. The DNA results had not just settled the question of paternity. They had exposed a web of deceit so deep, so twisted, that no one in that courtroom could have possibly imagined it. The real trial, The trial of Richard Hayes's character was just beginning. The courtroom was in an uproar. The judge's gavel banged repeatedly, a desperate attempt to restore order in the wake of the bombshell she had just dropped. But the shockwave of the DNA results was too powerful, a seismic event that had irrevocably altered the landscape of all their lives. Isabella felt as if the floor had dropped out from under her. 0%. The words echoed in her mind, a nonsensical, impossible refrain. She looked at Richard, who was now ashen-faced and trembling, and a new, more terrifying question began to form in her mind. If he wasn't the father, then who was? And why had he let her believe he was? Sarah, ever the quick-thinking lawyer, saw the opportunity the judge had created. She rose to her feet. "Your Honor," she said, her voice clear and steady amidst the chaos. "In light of this shocking revelation, we demand a full and immediate disclosure of Mr. Hayes's medical records, specifically any records pertaining to his fertility." Landon Michaels, still reeling from the complete implosion of his case, could only stammer a weak objection, but Judge Vance silenced him with a single withering glare. "Motion granted," she declared. "Mr. Hayes, you will comply immediately. This court suspects you have been perpetrating a fraud not only upon your wife but upon this court as well, and I can assure you we do not take kindly to that." The truth, when it finally emerged, was more devastating and pathetic than Isabella could have imagined. Richard Hayes, the titan of industry, the man who projected an image of virility and power, was sterile. A bout of mumps in his late teens had left him unable to father children, a secret he had guarded with a fierce, desperate shame his entire adult life. He had known from the moment Isabella told him she was pregnant that the child could not be his. But his ego, his pathological need to control the narrative of his perfect life, had been stronger than his sense of decency. He had seen her pregnancy not as a betrayal, but as an opportunity. An heir had been delivered to him, a son to carry on the Hayes name, and he had simply claimed it as his own, never once questioning its origins, because to do so would have meant revealing his own humiliating secret. The affair with Victoria was his way of compensating, a desperate attempt to prove his manhood to himself. He had lavished her with gifts, with a lifestyle, all to prop up his fragile, shattered ego. The aftermath of the revelation was swift and brutal. Richard's carefully constructed world came crashing down around him. The court case, which he had initiated to punish and control Isabella, had backfired spectacularly. He was exposed as a liar and a fraud. The judge, incensed by his deception, awarded Isabella a divorce settlement that was far more generous than she had ever asked for. She was given the penthouse, the gallery, and a substantial portion of his assets. He was stripped of any and all parental rights to the child he had so arrogantly claimed as his own. His professional life suffered as well. The scandal was front-page news, the story of the sterile tycoon who tried to claim another man's child too juicy for the tabloids to resist. His reputation was ruined, his business partners deserted him, and the empire he had built on a foundation of lies began to crumble. Victoria, for her part, disappeared from the scene as quickly as she had appeared. With Richard's fortune dwindling and his reputation in tatters, she had no more use for him. She was a parasite who had been drawn to the glow of his success, and now that the light had been extinguished, she moved on in search of a new host. For Isabella, the aftermath was a strange mix of turmoil and liberation. The question of the baby's paternity still loomed large, a mystery she now had to solve. She thought back to the months before she had conceived, a time when her marriage to Richard was already strained, when she had felt lonely and isolated. There had been a charity trip to build houses in a developing country, a trip Richard had encouraged her to take, probably to get her out of the way so he could spend more time with Victoria. On that trip, she had met a doctor, a kind, compassionate man named Ben Carter, who ran the local clinic. They had bonded over their shared passion for helping others, their conversations lasting late into the night. There had been one night, a night of emotional vulnerability and a little too much wine. A night she had pushed to the back of her mind, chalking it up to a momentary lapse in judgment. A mistake she had immediately regretted. With trembling hands, she found his contact information online and sent him an email, the words a jumble of hope and fear. The days that followed were a torment of waiting. She was free from Richard, but she was adrift in a sea of uncertainty. She had her son, this miracle child growing inside her, but she didn't know his story, his heritage. Then, one afternoon, as she was sitting in the nursery, the room that had been the scene of so much pain and now held the promise of a new beginning, her phone rang. It was an international number. "Isabella?" a warm, familiar voice said. "It's Ben Carter. I got your email." And in that moment, as she listened to the kind, gentle voice of the man who was, she now knew, the father of her child, Isabella felt the last piece of the puzzle click into place. The storm was over. The lies had been washed away. And for the first time in a very long time, she could see the horizon. It was clear and bright, and it was hers and hers alone to navigate. A year later, the city skyline that Isabella looked out upon was the same, but her view of it had changed entirely. The glass walls of the penthouse no longer felt like a cage, but like a window to a world of infinite possibilities. The silence that had once haunted the vast, empty rooms was now filled with the happy gurgles and coos of her son, Leo. Leo was a beautiful, healthy baby with a shock of dark hair and eyes that held a spark of gentle curiosity, eyes that were a mirror of his father's. He was the center of Isabella's universe, the sun around which her new life revolved. Her life was no longer defined by society pages and lavish parties, but by the simple, profound joys of motherhood. Her days were a happy chaos of feedings, diaper changes, and stroller walks through the park. She had discovered a strength she never knew she possessed, a fierce, unconditional love that had healed the wounds of her past and given her a new sense of purpose. Gallery Isabella was thriving. Freed from the shadow of Richard's influence, she had transformed it into a space that truly reflected her own vision. She championed emerging, unconventional artists, and the gallery had gained a reputation for its bold, innovative exhibitions. It was a success that was entirely her own, built on her talent, her passion, and her hard work. Ben had flown in to meet his son, a week after Leo was born. The meeting had been tentative at first, a delicate dance of two strangers bound by a shared creation. But as he held his son in his arms for the first time, his eyes filled with a love so pure and overwhelming, any awkwardness between them had melted away. He was a good man, a kind and decent man, and he had embraced his role as a father with an open heart. He couldn't be there physically. His work at the clinic was too important to abandon, but he was a constant presence in their lives. They Skyped every day, Ben's smiling face a familiar and comforting sight on the laptop screen. He sang lullabies to Leo from thousands of miles away and told Isabella stories of his work, of the lives he was saving, the difference he was making. Their relationship was unconventional, a modern family forged in the crucible of unexpected circumstances. They were not in love in the traditional sense, but they shared a deep, abiding respect and affection for one another. They were partners in the truest sense of the word, united in their love for their son. Richard, she heard, had lost everything. His company had gone bankrupt, and he had been forced to sell off his assets to pay his debts. He had become a ghost in the city he once ruled, a cautionary tale whispered at cocktail parties. Isabella felt no sense of triumph at his downfall, only a quiet, detached pity. He was a man who had been so consumed by his own image that he had lost sight of his own humanity. One sunny afternoon, as Isabella was sitting on a blanket in the park, watching Leo attempt to crawl, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Ben. "Thinking of you and our boy. I was thinking, the clinic is hosting a fundraiser next month, a chance for our donors to see the work we're doing. I was wondering, would you and Leo consider coming?" Isabella smiled. A trip. A chance to show Leo where his father lived, the world he was a part of. It felt right. It felt like the next step in their journey. She looked at her son, his face alight with determination as he reached for a colorful toy just beyond his grasp. He was a perfect blend of both his parents, her resilience, Ben's quiet strength. He was a symbol of her new beginning, a testament to the fact that sometimes the most beautiful lives are the ones that are born from the ashes of our broken plans. She typed back her reply, her heart full of a quiet, joyful certainty. "We'd love to. We'll be there." As she sent the message, she looked up at the sky, a vast, endless expanse of blue. For so long, her world had been defined by gilded cages and courtroom battles. But now it was defined by this love, this freedom, this beautiful, messy, unpredictable, and wonderful new beginning. And it was more than she had ever dreamed of. It was real. Isabella's journey from a gilded cage to a life of authentic freedom is a powerful reminder that our greatest strength is often found in our most vulnerable moments. Her story proves that true wealth isn't measured in diamonds or penthouses, but in resilience, love, and the courage to fight for the truth. In the end, it wasn't just a courtroom verdict. It was the reclaiming of a life. If Isabella's story of strength and survival moved you, please give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who needs a reminder of their own power. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next story of justice and empowerment.